All right, we are live on Facebook and now live on YouTube. Hi, everybody. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me today on the Daily Bullet, Clark Aposhian. He is the chairman of the Utah Shooting Sports Council. Clark, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for having me.
So before I get into the questions here, I want to remind our viewers, if you have a relevant question or comment, go ahead and pop it up on either the Facebook or YouTube video. I get them both in here, and we will bring up and discuss relevant comments. But please make your comments topical to what we're talking about today for them to get commented on, or to get them to give Mother May I to conceal carry a firearm.
Exactly, yeah. We don't have to ask permission to put a jacket on them.
Very cool. That's been, now your former governor had that bill come up to him once, vetoed it, and then just kind of squashed progress on it after that by saying, look, if it comes to me again, I'm going to veto it, so why waste your time? New governor this year and different result.
Yeah, Governor Cox, lieutenant governor under Gary Herbert in 2013, vetoed that legislation and then saw to it that pretty much all the other legislation since 2013 on permitless carry was slow walked around, if at all. So it never got to his desk, so he didn't veto it again. And we passed it this year. One of Governor Cox's campaign promises, was that he would sign it if it got to his desk.
All right, very cool. We're getting just a little bit of audio chop, but I can still understand what you're saying. I want to go to my next topic here, because the real reason I wanted you to come on today, I mean, of course, you know, it's very cool that Utah is joining the Permitless Carry Club, but you've still got legislation. When I hear the word common sense gun legislation, I shiver. But that is what I would call these next two bills I want to talk about, is real common sense gun legislation. First one up that I want to talk about, HB 267. That would allow people to temporarily put themselves on a do not buy list. Then this is pointed at people who are possibly thinking of harming themselves, having issues. Could you talk about that one a little bit?
Absolutely, and you know, it is. I mean, if we think that a no-buy list protects the public to some degree, then a no-buy list is going to protect the individual. It's kind of like when you go into a party. I don't know how I do this, but you know, let's say you're going to go into a party, poker game or something. You put your car keys into a bowl, and you can't get those car keys out unless you prove that you're sober to your host. You know, so you don't drink and drive. It's kind of the same thing. You have to think of these things ahead of time. So person in crisis, because, hey, minimum two-thirds of our suicides, our gun deaths rather, are suicide. And actually in Utah, we have one of the highest. We're like 85% of our gun deaths are suicide. So we needed to work on this. However, the only reason that Utah Shooting Sports Council is behind this is because it's voluntary, it's self-revocable, and it's private, confidential. And so what happens is, if a person is in crisis, but they have those moments of lucidity, moments of clarity, they can very simply put themselves on a list that, you know, I do get into a crisis, I'm not going to go ahead, I'm not going to be able to purchase a firearm. And that can do these things ahead of time, so they aren't so impulsive after. It's the same reason they would ahead of time go see a counselor, talk to family and friends, because they know they're having problems. In that crisis situation, they're not going to have it. They're going to succumb to their impulsivity.
Very cool. And I need to remind you, just really speak up, because your microphone is having a little bit of a hard time picking.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
See if I can. Okay.
All of a sudden now you're coming in fine. But
really?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to get right up next to my microphone then.
There we go. Let's talk a little bit about the suicide. We talked about this on the phone earlier. When somebody is committing suicide, there is a critical zone, and I believe you told me it was somewhere around 12 to 18 minutes, where if we can influence them in that time, if we can extend that time out, and they have time to actually think about it, then we have a real chance of saving that life. And I think that's what this voluntary list is so good for, is when they realize, hey, I'm in trouble, it gives them that bump that they'd have to go through before they could actually buy a firearm.
Exactly, and it is so much different than a red flag law, which we are completely against all these red flag laws, in that this utilizes the person's own volition, knowing that they're having some despondency, some crisis, if you will. But like you said, that 12 to 18 minutes, if we can slow them down and they can get past that ideation to act on their self-harm, then it doesn't mean they're all fixed. It doesn't mean they're all better, but we get another chance to help them. Problem is, I mean, yeah, somebody is going to commit suicide. They're going to do it.
Yeah.
The problem is with a gun, guns are so effective. I mean, that's why we utilize guns. They're so effective. We don't get a second chance. But we find that people that utilize a different form of, self-harm, it may not be effective, and we get a second chance with them. You just don't get firearms. And it's just like, taking the car keys from a drunk person, the same thing. Basically, we would do it, it's appropriate and it's ethical.
Well, and it's not even that, because it's the drunk giving the car keys to you, because this is voluntary on the part of the person who wants to put themselves on that list.
That's a better way to put it, Paul. That's it is the drunk giving his car keys up.
We are getting comments in from social media. I want to put up one from Dana on Facebook. Can they remove themselves? And you alluded to this, but could you expand on that?
Absolutely, they can remove themselves. And after 60 days, it's automatically removed, and they'd have to, automatically re-up it. But they can remove themselves at any point. But it does take a much more affirmative action on their part. But there's no records. These records are not kept afterwards. They are destroyed. But they can absolutely remove themselves.
All right, very cool. Let's talk about another one of the bills that are, I believe this is HB 200. Now, this would allow Utah residents to put, if they've got firearms, maybe they've got a family member that's having issues, it allows them to put those firearms in the custody of a police department or the state police, a law enforcement agency, for a period of time, for the guns to be in a safe place, and then they get them back later. But at that moment, for that period of time, the guns are not accessible. And this is another one that I think is a very smart move.
Yeah, this is HB 200 from Representative Malloy. And what it does, it creates an opportunity for a person to go to a police department if they're in crisis or in crisis, as long as they have ownership of the gun, like a husband and wife or something. And they can take that gun. They may not have family or friends or, neighbors or something that can hold on to that gun. It's not likely to be used a lot, but it's an opportunity. And it's basically an in-your-face for these red flag folks that want to institute these firearm protective orders. And it allows for a voluntary way for that firearm in a safe harbor, if you will. Again, the records are destroyed, and we required that in the legislation.
And that's one thing where the other side, the anti-rights side, I like to call them, always says, if it saves just one life, isn't it worth it? Well, I think these two specifically proposed bits of legislation would save lives. Most people who are borderline suicidal know it, and it's just getting past that difficult part. And there are people in families that, not every case, but often somebody knows if there's a problem, and rather than giving the guns up permanently, it gives a great place for them there just to be a break with the firearms out of the house.
Agree. Yeah, and that's why we've had to fight red flag laws. 3 years, even, and most of the red flag laws in Utah have come from Republicans, believe it or not. And so we've been able to effectively, take care of those and come up with much better solutions. for somebody that's in crisis.
Roderick on Facebook has a great comment. Are there stats between people already with guns that want to commit suicide and those that want to commit suicide and need to buy a gun? Is this legislation really needed?
That's a great question. Roderick has a great question, and nobody asked that, but there was a study done, and we were part of that. About 8% of the time, people need to go buy a gun. I mean, if they want to. Well, I should say, those people that either attempt or are successful in their suicide attempt with a firearm, 92% of them already had the firearm for at least 6 months prior to that. And they used it for, self-defense or hunting or collecting or whatever. And it was only 8% that actually went out and bought the firearm within 30 days of harming themselves.
Okay. All right. And we're getting some, for example, Elizabeth says, what part of the right of the people to keep and bear arms is in any way unclear. No gun control legislation. Leslie, this isn't gun control. This is entirely voluntary on the part of the person who wants help. That's all this is. There's no, the police aren't going to come knocking on your door looking for your gun. That's not what any of this is about. If this legislation wasn't voluntary, wasn't self-revocable, wasn't private and confidential, it's going to have a very chilling effect on an individual that's seeking help. They're just not going to do that. They're not going to seek that help if it doesn't have those. And if it didn't have every one of those components to it, we aren't going to, we'd be opposed to the bill, not neutral. We'd be opposed to it. All right, very cool. And I want you to go back to the revocable. If somebody does put themselves on this no-buy list, should it pass, and they decide 30 days later they want to come off the list, that they're better now, and they want to go ahead and resume being able to buy firearms, what is the process for doing that?
Well, they don't have to prove to anybody that they're better, quote unquote better. They just have to say, am rescinding my participation in the no-buy list, and they fill out a form and sign it. It's an affidavit, and that's it. They are off that list.
Very, very, very cool.
And it doesn't prohibit someone from owning a gun. Like, the average person that gets on the no-buy list because of a felony or something like that, well, they can't buy a gun and they can't possess a gun. In this case, it does not count for the guns they already own. I mean, I realize that could be a wrinkle in it, but that's where the safe harbor comes in then too, because we didn't want to, have, on the no-buy list and then pick up a gun or do something like that and get themselves into trouble. It cause more grief for them.
All right. One more, and I just want to briefly cover this one. Also, I don't have a bill number for this one, but there's a bill that would start a shooting program in high schools, and with
HB
that,
258,
that would okay, it would give a half credit, and it would towards graduation, and it would teach handgun, rifle, and shotgun shooting, and I'm assuming responsibility to high school students. I think that's a great idea. I went through a shooting program when I was in what would now be called middle school, when I was a younger person, a much younger person. But I think that's something that should come back to the schools. Now, if this is in the schools, these are, again, voluntary programs. The parents can pull students out of these programs, right?
Right, they can. And so what we've got is it's HB 258 by Representative Shipp out of Cedar City, Utah. And so what we've got here is it's a pilot program, a 3-year pilot program that teaches gun safety and that type of thing. All the things about it, kind of like a intense hunter safety course, but it deals with both pistols, rifles, shotguns, so on and so forth. Because kids are growing up in households right now where there aren't any guns. Or the mom and dad may have a gun, but they don't know how to use it, don't know how to teach the gun safety. And isn't education better than ignorance? And if a child finds themselves in a situation where there is a firearm present, there's not a responsible adult, and somebody is monkeying around with that gun, wouldn't education in the proper use of that firearm prevail over ignorance and sticking their head in the sand. The Utah Education Association came out against this, and they actually came out against education, even though they have education in their name, but it's the teacher lobby is what it is. And they're wringing their hands and wetting their bed over the fact that people might be caught handling a firearm. When I'm in my mid-50s here in Utah, and I'll bet you a lot of listeners had shooting ranges in the basement of their schools when they were growing up. And in Utah, they have them all over the place, but they use them for storage right now. So we need to bring those ranges back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One more topic, and then I'm going to let you go. But you are one of the last legal owners of bump stocks in the entire nation. Could you tell us how that works out?
Yeah, first off, let me say, I don't think the bump stock is a viable tactical tool in any way whatsoever. I think it's a range toy at best. And with that said, yes, I am the last, I think technically the last owner of the bump stock. I don't possess it right now. The ATF in Salt Lake City has it on a shelf for me. They're holding it because the judge said originally I could have it. They went back to court and said, no, the ATF wants to hold on to it, but they are not allowed to destroy the bump stock. Right now, and my attorneys, the New Civil Liberties Alliance, kind of like the ACLU, only they appreciate the Second Amendment. The New Civil Liberties Alliance is representing me. They're out of Washington, D.C., and it's basically about government overreach. If Congress wanted to ban bump stocks, that's their purview. It's not the administration, it's not the Attorney General, and it certainly isn't the ATF that can write new laws. And that's what we're basically fighting. And it just went 2 weeks ago before the full 10th Circuit Court, and we're waiting for the opinion on it.
All right. I want to get back to a couple of comments that have come in since the last time I was going to put some of these up, and since the last time I had put some of these up. And I think viewers may be coming into the middle of this and missing the point, but I still want to bring these up because if these people have come in the middle and not understanding, other people may too. So this one is, Greg says, seems to be a contradiction if you claim to be pro-A yet want to legislate gun rights. And I want to just point out that these are everything in the HB, let me go back to my notes, HB 267-200. Both of those are entirely voluntary. They're just opening up an avenue of help should a gun owner want that help. Am I right on that, Clark?
I think you phrased it correctly. It's like, why would you voluntarily give up your car keys? Because you know that you shouldn't be driving, if you're drunk or something like that. It's no different than that. And I got to tell you, the last thing that somebody in crisis needs, and we're dealing with it here in Utah, 85% of our gun deaths are suicides. And it's the last thing somebody in crisis needs is access to a firearm, any lethal means. And, and that's why we have promoted things like, getting rid of red flag laws and saying, if you know that your family, your friend, your neighbor, your coworker is having a hard time, go up to him, put your arm around him and say, hey, man, can I babysit your gun for a week? That way, just you and I know about it. The police aren't involved. There's no registration. There's no serial number. And when you tell me you want it back, you get it back. But I'd do the same for you if you were drunk. I'd take your car keys. Yep. And that's all. And it's the only reason we're going to do this, and we're thinking about doing this, is if we care about our friends and our family.
Clover Tack has a comment that I want to discuss. We as a community have some great volunteer organizations like Walk the Talk America and Hold My Guns. So is Utah working with either of these? I prefer...
Walk the Talk America I am very familiar with, and yes, we are. It's the same exact principle that Walk the Talk America does.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with Hold My Guns, but if it's anything like that, then yeah, we'll look into that too. And that's why, it's just the entirely ethical thing. It doesn't have anything to do with rights. In fact, it preserves your 2A rights, because what happens if you get labeled mentally deficient? Then you lose those rights. So we're trying to keep that out. We're trying to keep we're trying to get rid of mandates. We're trying to get rid of law enforcement involvement in these efforts.
Absolutely. And Sandra says, wow, really? Then take them to the police station and give them up. But see, that's not what this is going on. You're not giving up your guns under these proposed bits of legislation. In one case, you're saying, I don't want to buy any for a while, and I want, in case things get bad, I want there to be something that stops me. The other one is, I've already got these guns, but just for a while, I don't think that they should be around me or this person living in my house. Could you take care of them for a while?
Yeah.
The police will give them back.
Yeah, and they have to. In fact, and they can't be, and it shows in the legislation, a person cannot be coerced into even voluntarily giving up their guns. It has to be completely voluntary. The person has to do it affirmatively on their own, and they then just go get them back. It's basically like a storage unit, if you will.
Sure.
But law enforcement has to take them.
Absolutely.
And what this does is it answers the red flag laws for the same reason, which that's what we're trying to get rid of. And I would ask, if you're worried about red flag laws in your state, you probably need to come up with an alternative, because these things are sweeping.
Yeah, they are. And even looking at, that's one of Biden's and Harris's big wishes that they want in federal legislation is red flag on the federal level. And so if this were to go through and be positive in Utah and work in Utah, I think this could be something we can hold up to the federal government and say, hey, look, this is effective already. Why don't you try this instead?
Yeah, because it doesn't even approach a lack of due process. It doesn't approach confiscation, because that's all red flag laws are, is confiscation. This is just the opposite. This is maintaining the right to own that firearm and having it held in safekeeping.
Absolutely. Well, we're coming up on the time we have available for today, but Clark, before we go, Utah Shooting Sports Council, if you could tell everybody a little bit about it and where you folks are at on the web and how they can help out if they live in Utah or really anywhere.
Yeah, UtahShootingSportsCouncil.org, UtahShootingSportsCouncil.org. It's the longest website I think has ever been, and but you only have to type it in once. We've been around since the 70s, and we are the gun lobby in Utah. And we have been working on these things. Like you said, Paul, we just got permitless carry after trying for 7-8 years, and we finally got it.
Well, very cool. Clark, thanks for joining us today, man.
No problem. Thank you, Paul.
Folks, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. If you wouldn't mind, if you're watching on Facebook, like our Facebook page. And if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and click the subscribe link. And when you do, hit the bell so you get notifications when we go live, which we'll be doing tomorrow at 5 p.m. Central Time once again. See you then.